Remziye and her aunt watch over their family's home. With every hour that passes, they know chances of finding them alive are slipping away.
Yeah, waiting is very difficult. Waiting is very difficult.
But you wait and you hope.
Yes, yes, yes.
So it's your parents?
Yes, my parents and my brother.
And your brother?
Yes, my brother.
What are their names? Adine?
Jalal.
Jalal,
Please. My brother.
Bodies are continually being pulled from the rubble. It's hard to imagine how anyone can survive being trapped under this. For rescue workers at this point, every hour is crucial. It's been more than 48 hours since the earthquake struck. They've just found some survivors in this building here, a man and his 15-year-old grandson. The boy has asked for some water. These kinds of rescues take hours. Layers upon layers of concrete must be carefully lifted out. Abu Hamza is finally free, and despite spending 2 days under rubble, he asks a family friend, "How are you? I'm glad you survived." But as he's taken away, the realization his grandson hasn't made it. His friend just can't accept it. "I swear I heard his voice," he says, and begs the rescuers to keep trying. But they've had to move on. More voices have been heard under the rubble next door. Abu Hamza is taken away for treatment. But where will he go? The main hospital for the province isn't safe, and the car park is now a morgue. Some are here looking for their loved ones. The moment they find them is physically overwhelming. This Syrian family have brought their relatives' bodies here after digging them out themselves when no one came to help. On the floor of the car park, Hassan says goodbye to his father, Mahmoud.
The wall fell on my parents. I managed to save my mother, but my father died in my arms.
15 more of their extended family are under the rubble. Refugees from Aleppo, they now want to take them home one last time. The hospital here is no longer safe. Tents are being hastily thrown up. Being treated on the pavement nearby is Gulti, pulled from the rubble by her husband Ibrahim.
The ceiling fell on me. I told my husband to leave me and go. He said, "No, I'd rather die than leave you." We lost our house, our loved ones. We don't have anything.
Their daughter, 10-year-old Hatija, still has her parents. This family still have each other, but so many cannot say the same.
Emily with reporting. Well, our chief correspondent Alex Thompson has been to the small town of Nurdagi, which is close to the epicentre of Monday's strongest quake. He is now in the city of Gaziantep for us. Alex.
Yes, Christian, where we're seeing something right behind me which we haven't seen since we arrived here. This is not clearly search and rescue. Heavy planting, diggers simply removing tons and tons of twisted, contorted concrete. They clearly don't believe in the areas they're clearing now that any people can possibly be alive. So certainly a sign of how quickly things are progressing in the cities in this area, but also ominous too that they don't believe people are going to be alive in these particular areas here tonight. Outside the major cities, in, as you mentioned, Nudur, small towns like that, a completely different situation obtains. The search and rescue and indeed the longer term aid effort looks very, very different.
It's just gone, wiped off the map. What one onlooker tells us about this district of the town. The strata of tragedy, room height to knee height. Some just look on and pray. Their own family entombed in concrete a few feet away. Others silent, scarred by Monday, 4:17 a.m. Grief can't always be contained.
100 people in there, my mum, dad, brother, sister, all in there, all of them. There's no help. Send help, a lot of help.
We can't collect our own dead. They're lying there in pieces. Our children.
But are they dead? Is there still some hope?
Bekir!
Bekir, she shouts, knowing he's in there somewhere. Mehmet, my brother. Arif, my brother. Above, they heard two women calling from the rubble early this morning. Now, the pause again to listen for life, but only silence comes back. For an hour, with delicate dignity, they attempt to free another body from the crushing grip of concrete. They all know who is missing. This was 6 floors, 24 apartments, 10 bodies recovered so far. 2 adults pulled out alive, and a child now in hospital with a limb amputated. The growing stench of decomposing bodies hangs in the still, crisp winter air.
My uncle's son, Murat, a teacher for many years, and his father and mother with him, his wife and son and daughter. They're all lying under this rubble you see here.
Sometimes here, you see it coming down to friends, neighbours, volunteers, simply digging by hand for possible survivors.
Yet another pancake block of flats and no sign of any rescuers here yet. You've seen those men shouting into this rubble to see if there's anybody here. They know there are people buried here, dead or alive. Man on the top's just said, "Film here, where is the state?"
To walk along the road here is to confront the privacy of family lives torn open to the skies. The mundane, the domestic, now frozen in wreckage. Locals out and about, taking disaster response into their own hands, out of their own wallets. Hey, he shouts, if you want bread, come and get it. It's Ismail Doğan, a local businessman. And there is clothing for the children too.
We want to do God's will, so we're doing what we can for the people, using our own resources.
Open ground, the only safe ground, even in the winter cold. Bombed out of Aleppo, just over the border, families of Syrian refugees here for 5 years. Now their home destroyed again. Children and the elderly condemned to be outside in the winter. Back in the rubble, grief is boiling to anger. He claims the equipment here isn't up to the job. He's not alone in being angry at the response to the disaster.
Where is the government? Where? Where? If they can't help now, when can they?
The long-term aid effort here plainly is nothing like what will be needed. The Turkish government disaster response agency has arrived, but that's about it. Over 2 days, Mehmet and his team have erected 1 and a bit tents. When we can get internet, he said, we can work out the instructions to build it. Last night we did the one next door. Across the safe open ground, Hassan and his family get a brew on. Small comfort, they will spend another night tonight crammed in the car for warmth. Their house wrecked.
We lost 6 of our people. We're outside now. It's very difficult. The state needs to help us out. We need water, blankets, medication and nappies.
In truth, though, no state could meet the need on this scale just 3 days out. For now, people are mostly quite accepting of that. For now.
Well, they have just fired up the crane and are trying to lift probably a quite heavy piece of concrete from the middle of where they are working here. And joining me at this scene is one of the neighbours who just lives a block down the road, Charla Okya, who is also a general practitioner here in Adana and who represents doctors on their equivalent of the BMA. I mean, what is the current need? What sorts of injuries are you seeing?
I can't hear you very well.
Very, very loud here, I know. Tell me about the injuries that doctors are facing with patients here.
Firstly,
You know what, it's too difficult at the moment. There is a big piece of concrete being lifted and the crane is making a tremendous noise. So just bear with us 1 second while this happens. It's a key part of the work that they are doing. It enables them to get to the next level. And there we are. That, hopefully that has died down a little bit. So doctor, I mean, you live just there.
Yes, unfortunately.
So tell me what happened first.
Actually, at the morning 4 a.m., we get up, big shock, and I saw that building with collapsing. I shocked, and firstly I quickly get here, and I saw that the dangers was continue. So I had to get
Everybody
away.
Ran.
Yes.
Yeah. It's happening again. Inevitably. So tell me about the injuries that doctors are facing.
Firstly, we faced a big challenges for everyone, and especially we doctors. I'm working with Adana Medical Chamber, a member of Turkish Medical Association. Firstly, we visit other hospitals for the physicians' needs and patients' needs also, of course. We determine their needs. For example, physicians' needs, maybe food, meals, and other medical needs, and patients' needs. And after that, we determined we try to supply them medicines or other needs. After that, we try to establish a province coordination group with other academic medical chamber.
But the kinds of injuries that people are facing, is it crush injuries? Is it broken bones? What are you seeing?
Of course, we first saw injury or extremities. After that, we try to quickly transfer them the nearest hospital. But there's more patients, but less ambulances.
Yes.
We try to examination them.
And do you think things are getting better now? Are you getting more help and more equipment and more colleagues?
Getting better, but we need, after that, patients need other needs. For example, hosting or food, housing, or disinfectants, maybe. We try to supply them also.
Doctor, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. I know it's very difficult with all of this noise, but thank you very much indeed. Well, our reporters have not been able to get into northern Syria, where there has also been huge destruction and loss of life. 12 years of war there have meant that volunteers are very adept at finding survivors in collapsed buildings. In rebel-held territory in Aleppo province, rescuers have managed to save the life of a baby born beneath the rubble, even though both her parents and siblings were killed. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilson, reports.
A family has been trapped under the rubble for 2 days. But there's hope. And first, the father is saved. Then the daughter. The whole town of Messina, it seems, has gathered to witness a moment of joy amongst the grief, not just of the earthquake, but of a decade of war, during which the White Helmet volunteers have grown only too skilled at pulling people out of destroyed buildings. The son is saved too, and the family taken by ambulance to hospital. Here's the moment a tiny baby was rescued. It's hard to believe that she survived. She was born under the rubble in the town of Jinderis, rescuers cutting the umbilical cord from her mother's dead body. She was rushed to hospital covered in bruises. The medical staff have called her Aya, meaning word from God.
The baby today, it's so good. She is drinking milk. Her moral reflex is good. Her sucking is good. Her activity is good. Here she have some abrasion and contusion. She will be fine.
But many in Jinderis have perished and are being buried immediately according to Muslim custom. It seems so cruel that the same people who have endured Syria's unfinished conflict should have to go through this too. People are sleeping in their cars if they have them, or on the streets in sub-zero temperatures. The danger is that survivors will now die of exposure or disease. Yet this area is controlled by rebels. The Syrian government in Damascus regards them as terrorists who should not receive international humanitarian aid.
We must ensure that this aid does not reach terrorists and militants who are killing people in the areas they control. The international community must be aware of this in the context of its declared war on terror.
Unlike the Syrian government, nature doesn't distinguish between those who live on one or another side of a front line. The earthquake hit government-controlled Aleppo too, making thousands homeless. Here, rescue workers from the Algerian Red Crescent have arrived to help. The politics of aid may yet decide who lives and who dies in the coming days. In such a calamity, everyone needs instants of joy, like the moment little Karam was rescued in the town of Armanaz. He has no idea that he lives in a part of Syria that's controlled by rebels, and that may restrict his access to aid. He's just happy to be alive.
Well, joining me now from Idlib is Dr. Mahmoud Kader. He's a paediatric surgeon at Bab al-Hawa Hospital near the Turkish-Syrian border. Doctor, can you tell me what the situation is with you?
First of all, I would like to offer my condolences to all the families and to the families of all the victims that we have lost in this devastating earthquake. The truth is that what happened in the past 3 days is a real humanitarian catastrophe that we haven't experienced something like this before for a few decades. Although in this area we have suffered for 12 years from war and from bombing and displacement, this area is very dense with population who were displaced from their homes due to the war that has been ongoing for 12 years. This densely populated area was hit by a big earthquake, as if in 7.8 magnitude earthquake is an earthquake that we haven't experienced before in this area. So the situation is very difficult. A lot of victims, a lot of injured people, a lot of people who are still under the rubble. There is some buildings who have been who have crushed, and no one until now can go and lift the rubble to look for something who can still be alive. And the bad news is that after 3 days, and every day that comes on, the opportunity of these people who are still under the rubble to come out alive is getting smaller and smaller. It's a very difficult situation here in Syria, in northwest Syria.
Dr. Mohammed, we are seeing many thousands of aid workers and rescuers and international doctors arriving in Turkey to help the people here. What kind of help are you seeing arrive there?
One of the most important difficulties we are experiencing here in Syria is that whenever we got a mass casualty, that we have experienced a lot in the last 12 years due to bombing, you know that. Every time we had a mass casualty and a lot of injuries came to our hospitals, we deal with some of these injuries, and some injuries, some big injuries who need an ICU for a long time. We used to send it to Turkey. But for the bad fortune now is that Turkey is heavily affected by this earthquake. Turkey have got so many help from too many countries. A lot of rescue teams have arrived to Turkey to help the people lift the rubble. But here in northwest Syria, no one has arrived. We are using our local capabilities to try to lift the rubble. They are simple. We have simple equipment. We are trying to lift the rubble and get some lives from under the rubble. Too many injuries we have received here in medical facilities, in our medical facilities, who are already simple and not prepared to deal with this all and these big numbers of injuries and casualties. We had to deal with them without being able to send any injury to Turkey because they have their own injuries. We know that we know that the earthquake have hit Turkey so hard, and we don't want the help from Turkey. We want the help from the other countries. We want Turkey to allow the other countries to send medical help and medical personnel. The medical personnel here have got burnout from too many injuries coming to the hospital during the last 3 days. Some doctors are sleeping for 2 or 3 hours a day, and some medical staff have lost their families, and this is the most important thing. There is a lot of doctors who lost their families.
Sounds like a desperate situation, Dr. Mohammed. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Well, of course, the rescue efforts are continuing across Turkey. Let me show you some pictures now from Diyarbakir, which is right on the other side of the earthquake zone from where we are, 500 kilometres away from Adana, where they are still working their way through the rubble of a building in search of survivors as night falls around them, just as the rescuers are working here just a few yards away from where I am standing. And these scenes are being played out right across that 500-kilometre stretch. Well, President Erdogan of Turkey has acknowledged that initially there were problems with the emergency response, and he's promised to rehouse people left without homes within a year. In his first visit to areas hit by Monday's quakes, he urged people to ignore the critics, who he said were manufacturing outrage over the rescue operations. And there are reports of restrictions on social media and even investigations into journalists accused of critical reporting that foments hatred. Turkey's main opposition party said the blame for lack of preparedness was solely the president's responsibility. From the sky over Kahramanmaraş, there is a panorama of devastation. Seen on this scale, the shocking numbers of those killed start to make sense. And the frustrating, desperate reality that even though there are teams of rescuers, there aren't enough for those waiting with their buried family and friends. And for the survivors, when life has been reduced to a tent in a stadium, the idea of recovery and rebuilding, as promised by the president within a year, must be unfathomable. Turkey's leader came not just to soothe the pain, but to assert his authority. Acknowledging some issues yesterday, he claimed things are now under control and warned people not to listen to the critics. We will never allow our citizens to be left out on the streets, he said. I am asking our people not to give the provocateurs an opportunity and only pay attention to the statements coming from the Disaster Management Authority. I also ask our press members not to allow them. Today is a time of unity and solidarity. Facing re-election by June, this disaster is a crucial political test. This evening, internet monitoring groups say there appear to be restrictions on Twitter and TikTok, making it harder to see criticism from the opposition. We don't care anymore about the president's policy, he says, the PR work and the news full of lies and cheating. The question nobody knows yet is whether images like these of Mohammed Ahmed being fed tiny sips of water will ultimately be seen as a triumph of rescue or an indictment of Turkey's failure to enforce earthquake building codes. After all, look what it did to the road connecting Hatay in Turkey to Aleppo in Syria. But new building regulations since the 1999 earthquake, when 17,000 perished, are supposed to keep these mid-sized blocks standing, even in a big earthquake. The fact thousands have collapsed has left many wondering whether the rules were ever enforced. And for Syrians here who fled a war in which buildings were collapsed by bombing, many are now crossing the border going home, not as they intended, but in body bags, to be buried. Well, David Miliband was Foreign Secretary in Gordon Brown's government and is now president of the refugee aid organisation, the International Rescue Committee. He joins us now from New York. We have seen desperate scenes here on both sides of the border, but especially in Syria, where I know IRC has been active in the past. What are you able to do there?
Well, good evening, Krishna. The International Rescue Committee has about 430 staff in the northwest of Syria. This is an area with about 4 million people living there. Many of them driven into that zone from other parts of the country of Syria because of the fighting. What we're able to do is keep people alive, to be absolutely frank with you, delivering healthcare, delivering fundamental cash and other support, blankets. It's the absolute basics. As the minutes tick by and it becomes clear that there are fewer and fewer people to be rescued, the job becomes keeping people alive who are there. This is a crisis that is piled upon crisis, because even before the earthquake, on Sunday, across Syria, there were 15 million people dependent on aid agencies to keep their body and soul together. Now we have the earthquake as well, and you've shown very well the scenes in Turkey, which is a well-ordered country with a strong government. In the northwest of Syria, there is no official government. It's a range of different rebel groups and NGOs trying to support people. But if we weren't there, then people really would have nothing between them and the precipice.
I mean, you say it's a country with a strong government. Domestic politics is intruding here to some degree. The government is under criticism from the opposition and from ordinary people, and are being very fierce in their response to that, saying it is fomenting hatred and that they shouldn't, actually appealing to the media here not to broadcast any criticism of their response. I mean, how should the international community approach President Erdogan?
Well, I think that the engagement needs to be wholehearted and full-throated on behalf of the people of Turkey, but also the people of Syria, of northwest Syria in this case, who desperately need help. That should be at the absolute forefront. The fact that President Zelensky should have announced 67 members of a rescue squad from Ukraine being deployed to the Turkey-Syria situation shows you how really there's a need to put humanity first. And for the people on the ground, it's the truth that counts, and they can see it in front of their eyes. Either they've getting help or they're not getting help, and that's the issue that everyone faces. And frankly, the minutes matter because we're seeing absolutely extreme needs. You know how cold it is. People associate the Middle East with heat, but it's absolutely bitterly cold there. Almost every family will have lost relatives. My own organization has lost 2 colleagues. So the trauma and the grief is completely widespread, but also the urge to keep people alive is very strong indeed. And that's going to take a huge international response, which frankly has been missing from the Syria crisis, which has remained a crisis for 10 years, but the world's attention has moved on.
Well, and of course, the country with purchase in Syria and over President Assad is Russia, and the West's relations with Russia are at, one of the all-time lows. So is there anything that can be done, do you think, to get that border open and get aid into those parts of Syria that are affected?
Well, the commercial crossings are open, Krishna. What's been a massive problem is the reduction from 2 to 1 in the number of humanitarian crossing points. That reduction was the result of a Russian veto at the UN Security Council, speaking to the political division that you have mentioned. Now, the one remaining humanitarian crossing point was itself a victim of the earthquake. I'm waiting for news about whether it's reopened. But obviously, at a time when the UN has reported that even before the earthquake, there needed to be more crossing points into northwest Syria, there needs to be an absolutely clear clarion call that nothing should stand in the way of saving lives and keeping people alive. And we'll see if that gets pushed back at the UN Security Council, but there should be no hesitation in putting it forward.
When you look at the scale of need here, what kind of challenge do you think this is to what we call the international community?
Well, at one level, it's massive because it's millions of people who've been affected, and there's complete wreckage of the physical infrastructure, never mind the emotional and human infrastructure. On the other hand, because it's a natural disaster, it's much more obvious than in a politically charged situation or a conflict situation, or what the issues are that are required. And the organization in Turkey is going to have to come from the Turkish government, but the support can come internationally. It's also going to have to come from Turkish provincial and local government, which is very strong across the country. In Syria, it's a different situation. It's rebel-held areas, or maybe plural rebels-held areas, because there are different rebel groups that are in control. But I think this is a moment to insist that the future of Syria needs to be the subject of a multilateral UN-led approach and can't just be left to Russia, Iran, Syria and Turkey, who are the quad that at the moment are in charge of the politics in the country.
David Miliband, thank you very much indeed.